an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering A Wizard Abroad, the final chapter. It's Tir na Nog, and we get to see Balor, and he is a douchebag. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Yama for commissioning this episode. I went ahead and just finished with this final chapter and didn't start the next book according to the advice that I was given in the Mighty Network. And I think that was probably a good call. I tend to go over sometimes when I talk about these chapters, so I probably don't need to try and pack in more than I have already. So Tir na Nog starts off with Kit really hearing the way that the Amadune or the Queen, not the Amadune, the Queen says, "We have not done badly, but I think we shall not be able to do much more. All magics are diminishing in the face of our enemies' some Gaelic word. And I feel the weariness in my bones. Do not you?" And it's easy to take that in the moment of as just being like, yeah, I'm real tired. This fight has been rough. But Kit hears it and says that is like an energy sap that is sewn into whatever that darkness is ahead of us. It's something that has been pulling all of the vitality out of us so that we can fucking grow exhausted a lot more quickly. And I love when he tells when he tells Nita, don't exert yourself if you can avoid it. You may need that energy for later. It's like such an incredibly, it's one of those moments where somebody really is just trying to be helpful. They really are. But they're saying something that's like kind of so obvious as to be insulting that they think that this is helpful to you. You know, like, what do you fucking think I'm going to do? You know? And I love that she says what she really needs for energy right now is a candy bar. And he pulls one out. And this is like, I don't know if this is on purpose, but I feel like it has to be. He hands her one. She says, "It's got peanuts in it. I hate peanuts." Kit grabs it back and starts to unwrap it so that he can eat it himself. And then she snatches it back. And Tula, who has watched this whole thing from the backpack, it says Tula snickered at her. To which I'm like, are you trying to tell us that was a Snickers bar without actually saying it? I feel like you wouldn't have used the word snicker. I feel like that was very purposeful. Because later on we hear about how there's like peanuts and caramel. And I'm like, you don't need to keep on giving me this detail because I already want a Snickers bar pretty much most of the time. So just don't help with that, okay? And I don't need it. So Nita is looking at the path that they are taking along the river. Trees arched close overhead, and the sound of the river down in its stony watercourse was muted. If something should hit us here, we'd have nowhere to go, Nita thought as she took another bite of the candy bar. And then the screaming began again, very close. So yeah, apparently somebody else had the same idea. And she realizes that she needs like to be able to speak to cast some spells. And that since her mouth is full of caramel and peanuts, she is having a little bit of trouble, like managing it, and only just gets to one word out, like a second before a drow hits Kit from like his blind side. Which begs the question, and I've, asked this question before as well, with other things, like in The Magicians, a character loses his hands and is no longer able to cast because he doesn't have hands. And I had a little bit of a problem with that. Like the idea that your magic is so intrinsically tied into a physical ability that should you lose that physical ability, you can't actually use your magic. That is something that has always bothered me. And the thing is that I know it's necessary to institute a method of disabling magicians. You have to have a way of getting them off balance so that they can't do magic the same way. But the idea that if somebody had a disability where they couldn't speak, where they were born without hands, lost their hands in an accident, pick something on the list, and that means that they may have been a magician otherwise, but now that possibility is completely gone to them, bums me out. And so in this situation, what I'm choosing to believe is that there is a way to do magic without saying anything, but that Nita doesn't necessarily know about it or know how to do it. Because I just want to feel that there is an option out there for those who are not full, like able-bodied, not one of the ableds, as I have seen the disabled community talk about able-bodied people. I just want to think that because there is something that's a little bit ableist, whether or not it's intentional, about losing a physical ability, and that meaning that like this entire world of magic is now closed to you. So I'm hoping that there is an option out there for people who can't speak, and that it's simply, because Nita is fully able-bodied, that she doesn't know about it because she's never had to know about it. So something grabs her from behind and begins to choke her. And she starts to lose her vision and begin to pass out. And all of a sudden, there's this roaring noise behind her. And then she looks up, and because she got dropped, and she sees this, like, basically a river of light that has flown over everything. And it's leaving anything that isn't of the Fomori basically completely alone. It's anything of the drows, and the pukas is the other one. I'm going to look up what a puka is because I don't even remember. I know I've heard of them, and I'm picturing something like a water spirit. But let me see. Considered to be bringers both of good and bad fortune, they're a creature of Celtic folklore. Yeah, it just has like a couple of different illustrations of one, but there isn't really a definition. It's just like, oh yeah, it's just a creature. And they look sort of like monkeys a little bit is the way that they are. Let's see. Puka can have dark or white fur or hair. The creatures were said to be shape changers, which could take the appearance of horses, goats, cats, dogs, and hares. They may also take a human form, which includes various animal features such as ears or a tail. Interesting. Okay. But yeah, so these things all get carried away on this like river of light. And I didn't realize it at the time. I was like, whoa, what was that? And then she says to Kit, looks like Doris is using the cup. And I was like, oh, duh. Right. I didn't even that's one of my favorite things is when there is a weapon that is kind of like low-key lame seeming, and then you are able to do something really rad with it. So, you tell me that there's a cup that's got like healing water in it, and I'm like, all right, that's cool. I mean, healing people is, you need it. That's fucking your army, right? But it also is a sort of passive weapon that's meant to be more of like a defensive thing rather than an offensive thing. And it never even occurred to me that you could produce something like this that just fucking washes the enemy away. And I would love to know what it was like for Doris, because later on, when we see Ronan and he has the spear, he can sense that it's not the right time to throw the thing. And I wonder if Doris, like, used the cup because it seemed like a good idea in her own mind, or if the cup told her, tip me over, or if the cup tipped itself over. I'm just like, because the way that this is all set up is there's so much that's sort of like a instinctive connection between the objects and the people carrying them. And I just would have liked to see that, and see how she knew to do this, or if it was the cup speaking and telling her, hey, do it, do it, do it. So let's see. Oh, right. I forgot that she, like, says to Tula in the backpack, are you okay? And Tula just says, ask me again later, in this really irritated voice. The last traces of the blue-green light of the cup's wizardry were sinking into the ground like water, along with the real water, which was running down into the watercourse of the Dargle, which the Glencree stream had just met. Nita sagged against Kit as he looked northward along the floodplain of the Dargle toward Bray. The darkness was getting more and more solid, and she felt ready to collapse. And they look around and realize that, like, a lot of them are feeling it, to the point that a few of them are needing to be carried. And it's not because they're, like, injured. It's that they are that fucking tired. And she sees this line of darkness that's sort of hugging the ground and inching toward them. And Nita is just like, we can't do this. There's no way. We are way too fucking wiped out at this point. It was bigger than all three of the previous forces that had attacked them put together. Oh, no, Nita thought. I can't. And neither can a lot of the rest of us. There never was any counting them, even in the old days, Tula said. It seems nothing has changed. So the wizards just sort of stand there staring at each other and going, I don't know, like nobody really knows what to do. And all of a sudden, the ground starts to shake. And they all sort of react, looking around to make sure that there's nothing nearby, that with this earthquake is going to fall on them. And Kit says the stone. Down by that advancing line of darkness, trees toppled over and huge boulders of Wicklow granite rolled down the hillsides toward the ranks of the Fomori. They broke, screaming and running in all directions. It did them little good. One of the hillsides shrugged itself up and up until it fell over on the Fomori vanguard. Behind it, the rest milled about in confusion between the two ridges that paralleled the open ground where it sloped gently toward Bray. The thunder of the quaking ground suddenly became a roar. Nita clutched at the earth as a single awful shock went through it. Toward Bray, the horde of dark Fomori was abruptly missing from the ground. Nothing could be seen but smoke and dust rising in the gloom. That's pretty rad. You know what this is reminding me of? And it's like, not a one-to-one comparison. But there's a recent episode that I don't remember if it was like Dresden Files or what, where I talked about this book that I loved as a kid called Bony Legs. And I don't know how many, it's by Joanna Cole. I'm looking it up right now. I loved this book so much as a kid. Like, it was one of those that I just read over and over again. And it's a really, it's an old folk tale that was just illustrated in a pretty great way. And basically, she is a little girl who gets captured by a witch who lives in like a little hut on chicken legs. It's a Baba Yaga, but I didn't know that as a kid. And this girl, like, who is kind to these two little animals, she is given a mirror and a comb and I think something else. And as she runs away the girl like throws the comb over her shoulder, and the comb turns into a bunch of trees that are growing really, really close together. She throws the mirror over her shoulder, and it turns into a lake. And so Baba Yaga, who is chasing her, has to navigate around all of these trees and this lake and everything. And it really slows her down so that the girl can get away eventually. And this kind of reminded me of that. Like the cup and the stone, they react in a way that's just very different than what I was expecting. And they don't like manifest into an object that like by shape-shifting or anything, but they manage to do a thing that's like connected to what they are with their connection to earth and water in a surprising defensive way that I don't necessarily know was intended by the people who made it. Like in the Bony Leg story, the little girl was told, throw this over your shoulder and it'll help you. But she doesn't know what that is going to look like. So she does it, and it does wind up hugely helping. But she didn't know that it would do it when she throws it. And I don't know if they're aware of what the cup and the stone can do when they take it with them. They're like, okay, they had these last time. They're magical objects of great power. We know that they will be helpful because they were before, and we have been given instruction to do it pretty much the same way again. But I don't know how much detail there was about what these objects did the previous time. You know, how much information do they have on the way these things operated? So I just think that that's pretty cool. And no one had much to say as they passed the great smoking chasm that had been a green meadow between two hills. One of the hills was flat now. The other had great cracks in it, and from far down among the rock tumble in the chasm, as the wizards passed slowly by it, faint cries could be heard. That's brutal. Like, look, I'm not trying to be on the side of, like, evil here, but just kill them, man. Just put them out of their misery. There's no need for this, like, you know, drawn out fucking death that's like really slow from being crushed. Yikes. And Nita's tiredness got worse and worse, so that it was almost as much as she could do to just drag herself along. Only the sight of Kit in front of her, doggedly putting foot in front of foot, kept her doing the same. And eventually they get to this hill, and they see this huge flowery plain, but the darkness is like sort of hovering over it, like making it so that the flowers are like, they're not vivid. It makes everything sort of gray and flat. And Nita is looking at the darkness, trying to figure out what it is. Is it a storm? Is it cloud or fog or something? And then all of a sudden she sees ships. She could see, and this is really cool. It was a line of dark ships, but ships like none she had ever imagined before. Ships with hulls the size of mountains, with sails like thunderheads. She could see the chains of pallid lightning that held them to the shore. This was the black wizardry that would drag this alternate Ireland from its place in the sea up into the regions of eternal darkness and cold, into another ice age, perhaps. What would happen to the real Ireland and the rest of the world after it, Nita had no idea. And under the wall of darkness. At first, she thought she was looking at a hill. That almost looks like a sort of squashed head there. But no head could be that ugly. This reminded me a ton of a moment in one of the Narnia books. And it's one with Eustace Scrubb and Jill Pole, I think. And it's a similar thing where they're like sitting in this weird trench that they don't realize is like a wall to giants that they go and like lean on and hang out at and have a drink or two at. Like it's a bar almost. And she sees this like rock formation and is like, huh, God, that almost looks like a face. It would have to be a really uncommonly ugly face, but still, it kind of looks like a face. And then it moves, and she's like, oh, God. And that's exactly what happens here. She's just like, that, no face could be that ugly. That doesn't make any sense. One eye squinted away to nothing. The other was abnormally huge, bulging, the lid a thin, warty skin. And it says face and body together combined into an expression of sheer spite, of long cherished grudges and self-satisfied immobility. The look of it made Nita feel a little sick. And then she saw it breathe and breathe again. And she realizes that this is Balor. And this is pretty dope right here. That she realizes every time that she has seen the Lone One before, it's snappy. It's on top of shit. It's, as she puts it, young, dynamic, dangerous, actively evil. It is a kind of evil that is out here actively wreaking harm, malicious, and doing things like for the sake of causing trouble in a kind of what one could imagine as being like almost a puckish way, except that the harm it's wreaking is much more, it's not, just a prank. And this thing, I feel like there's significance to the fact that this thing is old and, as she puts it, a lump of inertia and unexamined hates, which I really like. It's a sort of like a drawing a distinction between different kinds of evil. And there is a type that is, needs to be sort of out and about doing its thing. And then there is a kind that is so entrenched and so like almost a habit that it is almost more difficult to get rid of because it's got like roots that are put down so much deeper. So while going up against the other lone power, you have to be fast and quick thinking and be able to like adjust to what it's trying to do. This is the kind of thing that you need like a bulldozer to get under it and uproot it because it is so just entrenched, it's just a wild but very interesting difference in the way she's choosing to have Balor appear from the way we've seen the Lone One appear before. So Johnny says, I see that you're doing your usual thing. We know that you're here. I know that you kind of are trying to like hide a little bit, but we know you're here. We see you. We know this place pretty well. Your creatures have all been taken down, and you can either leave or you can be driven out. So you better pick one. And at this point, there's no answer. And everybody is just sort of like, well, I guess that's our answer. Ronan, you obviously are up because you've got the fucking spear. Take care of it. But shit doesn't go the way that you expect it to go. You think that, okay, Ronan's going to step forward and throw the thing, and maybe Balor will have some sort of defense against it, but this will be like the battle. This will be the thing between Ronan and Balor. But no. Ronan's like, it's not ready. I don't know why, but I'm not meant to use it yet. Nita's aunt came up carrying Fraggle, which looked dull and tired. She glanced at Johnny, looking slightly confused. Johnny shook his head. Don't ask me, he said. I think we've got to play this by ear. Do what you did before. She held up Fraggle and said the last word of the spell of release. The wind began to blow again, but there was a tentative feel to it this time, almost uncertain. The wind rose and rose, but there was still that feeling of hollowness at the heart of it, and when it fell on Balor at last, there was no destroying blast, no removal. It might have been any other wind blowing on a hill with as much result. It died away at last with a moan and left Fragarach dark. So then Doris has the cup. And she pours the, light water out of it. And it doesn't even make it to Balor. It loses its momentum and gets soaked into the ground around the hill and swallowed up. And the cup loses all of its light and does not look like a magical object anymore. So Johnny at this point is like, you know what? I've had about enough. We've been fucking dying. All of us are exhausted. Ronan, throw the fucking spear and let's get this over with. So he throws it. It strikes Balor. And then it bounces off him and just falls to the ground. And a moment later, it jumps back into his hand. But initially, that shit I thought was going to be lost. I thought it was going to be in Dresden Files, the Swords of Faith, if they are used in a way that is not in accordance with their intention, the power of them goes out and they are just a sword. And I was like, is this meant to have been used at a different point? And the fact that he sort of forced it, does that mean that it's just not able to be used ever again? And I had a really terrible moment of is that spear just fucking gone? But then it gets up and goes back into into his hand. And I was like, okay, so it's still alive in its way and it's still able to be used, but it's not obviously interested in cooperating with them the way they want it to. It's got its own thing going on. And I can't imagine when that is. And it's not until later that I'm like, of course, his eye. Because it's Nita who thinks of that she's like, well, he has to wait and use it through his eye. Another sound began, a low, tortured rumbling. And people fell over, tried to find their footing, lost it, and fell again. Nita was one of them. When she got up, she noticed a particular feeling of insecurity, as if something she had been depending on had suddenly vanished. And Johnny says, that was the stone going. The linkage to it is dead. And everybody's like, oh, cool. So we lost. It's this moment of just really are we... Is that okay? And I love this. Kit says it's enjoying this. We've lost. It knows it. And it's prolonging this for fun. And then Tula, who has been chilling in the backpack, watching this shit. Tula has had it. Tula is like, I don't think that we're going to just let this motherfucker sit there all fucking smug, cackling to himself, feeling really fucking high on his own ass. Not happening. This is so funny. So she at first begins to recite some poetry. See the great power of Balor, Lord of the Fomor. See the ranks of his unconquerable army. See how they parade in their pride before him. See how they trample the earth of Iriu. But the kitten says it with fucking thick sarcasm. It's the best. It's the best. She goes on Is it not the way of his coming in power? His splendor is very great. He bows down all resistance. Never was a better way for the conqueror to come here. May all who follow him fare just the same way. See how the children and beasts flee before him, and their elders, just hoary old men and women, with their few bits of rusty ironmongery and a crock and a stone. That's all they have with them. Can it really be so, what we see before us? Or is it a trick of the plains of Tethra, where everything seems otherwise than it is, and night might be day if one's will was in it? Is it truly what we see, the mighty conqueror, with his armies ranged and his ships all ready, or something much less, just a misconception, a fakery made of lying and shadows? No army here, just some shattered stonework, some poor bruised goblins all running away. No ships at all, but just the old darkness, the kind that used to scare children at bedtime. And no mighty lord, no mastering horror, just a bad dream left over from crazier times, a poor ghost wailing for what's lost forever, some run-down spook complaining about hard times and what he can't keep. Can it be that mortals are too strong for him even here on his own ground? That accountants and farmers, housewives and shopkeepers and children and cats are even too mighty? Then all hail the ragged lord of the Fomor, a power-down throne, a poor, weak spectre that ought to take himself off to the West Country and haunt some castle for American tourists. Be off somewhere and beg your bread honestly, and don't come around our doors with your threats, you shabby has-been. Just slouch yourself off, crooked old sloth pile. Show some initiative. Get up and then all of a sudden he's like, fine. And he starts to get up and is like, who the fuck is talking to me like that? Show me who it was. To which Tula's like, bitch, I'm right here. You got such a big bulging ass eye you can't see me with that shit? Maybe you should open the other one. Huh, buddy? I'm right fucking here. It's pretty amazing. Tula is just so like, no kid, we're not doing this. So as it begins to get up, Nita heard its breathing and knew her old enemy again, knew by sight the one that she had been desperately afraid would catch her on the night of the wolves. Its pack was gathering to it out of the shadows now, ready to hunt the wizard's souls out into everlasting night and tear them to shreds like coursed hares screaming. In the pack's longing thoughts, dangerously close to becoming real in this other world, the shrieks could be heard, the blood could be smelled already. But at the moment she could do nothing but look at Balor's dark face and see his bitter smile. And as yet, no glance fired from his eye. The Balor shaped still bound it to that shape's rules. So this is when everybody looks at Ronan and begins to realize it's got to open its eye. And then you have to fucking stab it through the eye with that shit. And everybody's looking at Ronan, which is shaking. And Nita at first is like, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Because its eye isn't open yet. And she knows it's just going to be a waste. So she's watching Ronan trying to hold it back and panicking that maybe he's not going to like realize and do it too soon. This is a moment that's pretty cool. Because, you know, It's one thing in mythology to know, oh yeah, Balor is supposed to have an eye that can, like, you know, destroy everything. It's one thing to hear that. But to have it described by a great writer is much more fun. A bare slit of light opened in the dark face of the bulk before them, like the first sliver of the sun coming over a hill. It hit Nita in the eyes and face like thrown acid, searing. She cried out, fell down, and crouched in on herself, trying to make herself as small as possible as the light hit her all over and burned her. All around her, she could hear the screams of others going down, and right next to her, on top of her, she thought, the sound and feel of Kit crying out hoarsely and rolling over in agony. It was worse than almost anything she could remember, worse than the time the dentist was drilling and the Novocaine wore off and he couldn't give her any more. The pain scraped down her nerves and burned in her bones, and no writhing or crying helped at all. The tears ran out and mixed with the mud that her face was grinding into. But at the same time, something in her refused to have anything to do with all this and was embarrassed and angry. The kind of anger that had awakened in her while she was fighting and liking it. Shaking her head in that anger, Nita pushed herself up on her hands and knees, even though she felt like she would die doing it, and squinted ahead of them. Through the mud and her tears of pain, she could just make out Ronan still struggling with the spear. Farther ahead, the darkness was broken only by that awful sliver of evil light, getting wider now as Balor's eye opened. And this fucking guy doesn't throw the spear. Everybody's looking at Ronan like, okay. His eyes open. You can see that we're all on the ground, writhing in agony. Fucking do it. What are you doing, guy? This is what we've been waiting for. She goes into his head with Kit, and they can hear him thinking to himself, if I let it go now, if once I throw the spear, I become the power, become the champion, never mortal again. And Kit is saying to Nita that they have to make Ronan throw it. And she's like, that's not how this works. He has to choose to do it. That's the whole point, is free will and being willing to make that sacrifice. So she just sort of is like, dude, go on, please. And finally, the spear like shouts with triumph as it realizes that Ronan is about to throw it. It leaped out of his hands, roaring like the shockwave of a nuclear explosion, trailing lightning and a wild wind behind it as it went. That terrible eye opened wide in shock as a fire more terrible than its own hurtled at it. In the instant of the eye's opening, the pain increased 100 times over. Nita screamed and fell. And then came the piercing. Nothing alive on that field failed to feel it, for everything alive had entropy in its bones. All cries went up together as the essence of all burning ate the darkness to its heart, and however briefly, to each of theirs. It was painful, but a terrible relief. Terrible because the mortals present knew that once they returned to the real world, that small personal darkness would be back with them again. Something else, though, did not find it a relief. Something that had almost nothing but entropy about it. The scream of the lone power in its shape as Balor went up and would have torn the sky if the sky were made of anything more solid than air. It took a long time to die away. So, of course, at this point, I'm just like, well, what happened to Ronan? And I was very relieved that that's immediately what Kit and Nita are wondering. And they go over to him, and he seems to be pretty much the same. He's holding the spear. It's not acting up the way it had been. And there is a shadow rising over him. And it is of a woman with long dark hair and like a cloak that's like billowing out. And she says, "Let the hosts and the royal heights of Ireland hear it, and all its chief rivers and invers and every rock and tree, victory over the Fomori, and they never again to be in this land. Peace up to the skies down to the earth under the skies, power to everyone." And as she sort of dissipates, Kit says, "It's funny, but she looks kind of like Biddy." Which I'm like, is that meant to be that Biddy is part of the Morrigan? Is the Morrigan like, multiple facets? I don't know, because Biddy was like, an iron worker. Is that something that the Morrigan was supposed to be? Because the Morrigan's like, meant to be sort of a carrion bird, like her symbol. I don't know. I don't know what to make of that. So when finally Ronan looks at them, Nita is very relieved to see that look that he had been getting that made him seem like he was not even quite human anymore has sort of gone from his face, because he had been always looking so like far away in his eyes, like he was distracted and thinking about something or not really connecting to the world around him. And he just seems like himself again. And he says that he didn't dare let the spear go. And Nita's like, "Yeah, no, that's fair. But are you okay?" And he says that the sort of angel spirit, whatever you want to call it, is still in his head. And Kit's like, "I think you may be stuck with him, but remember which side he's on. I think he'll behave if you do. If you're lucky, you'll never hear from him again." Unacceptable. I don't like this. I mean, if you're lucky, you'll never hear from him again, but you're going to know he's there. And that's just really rude. You're coming into somebody's house and just like taking a guest room and just like, "I'm going to be here. Just FYI, I'm just not leaving. That's going to be a thing that you now have to live with." That's messed up. That's his brain. Get out of there. We needed you, granted, but now it's time to go. I don't like it. How is this poor kid supposed to be able to ever like take a shit or jerk off ever again with this thing just fucking in there? Are you kidding me? No, sir. I do not like it. And he says to Kit, "If I'm not lucky." And Tula says, "Those who serve the powers themselves become the powers." Again, I don't like it. We're talking, just a bit ago about how it's up to him to throw the spear, that this is all about free will. He has to make the choice. And then they're going to have this thing that just comes into his head uninvited and stays without permission. What about the free will thing? That seemed important. What the fuck now? I don't care for this at all. I don't like it. I think it's very unfair. I think Ronan deserves better. And I wouldn't be surprised if the poor guy began to sort of lose it eventually. No. Unacceptable. Nita looked up and around, watching the clouds retreating and the brightness growing still, though there was no sun now, but a soft violet evening all around them. Everything was beginning to burn with a certainty surpassing anything Nita had ever seen in the duns of the Sidhe. Beside her, one of the wizards, the handsome woman with the dark hair and the Viking axe, said with a chuckle, "Ah, the Celtic twilight." All around them, the wizards gathered there began to shine in that light, seeming more perfectly themselves than ever before. The Sidhe, already almost too fair to bear, began to acquire a calmer beauty, more settled, older, deeper. So Johnny is talking to the queen of the Sidhe, and he says, "Well, you asked if your world would ever draw closer to Time Heart, and I could only say the champion must come with his spear and the world of your desire be lost, because that was an old prophecy. But it doesn't look like what we expected. Will this do? And she says, yes, and you should probably take your people home, because this world is going to continue to perfect itself now that basically all entropy is gone, and your humans are not going to be able to bear it. So, Nita's aunt lifts Fraggle Rock, which is burning again with power, to which I'm just like, what was the point of you guys? Listen, I'm not trying to I get it. They were very powerful against the Fomor. They wouldn't have been able to get past those fucking armies without these things. But there is a bit of me being like, oh, but as soon as you come up against Balor, you're like, whatever, I'm just an ordinary sword. Don't mind me. You know what, Fraggle Rock? How about you fucking just sack up a little bit, okay? Keep your light on. Stop trying to hide. I'm not impressed. I don't like you. Feel the same way about everybody. As one, the people of the hill turned toward that thin, sweet music, but then one by one they looked towards the light slowly growing in their own northeastern sky. The splendor of morning in a world growing ever nearer to Time Heart began to swell in the sky, blinding, glorious. And all the wizards are like, God damn it, we have to leave. They are very bummed to have to go when they feel this, basically what's the equivalent, I would imagine, of the presence of God being around them, and they pass into the parking lot of Castle Matrix through the gateway. And Nita's aunt is kind of regretful of the fact that they had companions who fought with them and died and are still there in that alien land. And she feels bad that there's no way to give them a proper burial or, bring them back. And Johnny is like, I totally see what you mean. But at the same time, they're going to be basically drawn into Time Heart, which is pretty much the best you can ask for. I mean, are they even really dead if they go to Time Heart? And I feel like that's fair, if I had died and you asked my ghost, we can pull you back through this portal and bury you in the ordinary dirt that's not magic, or we can leave you here in a place that's getting drawn towards the center of the meaning of life and God. What would you prefer? I think I'd pick the second one. Just saying. So I think it's fine. In the northeast over the sea, a line of light, blinding, brighter than a sun, broke over the water. The spear Lewin in Ronan's hands flamed at the touch of that light on its steel. All that country on the north side of the gateway flushed with a light more powerful, seemingly more solid than the solid things it fell on, and burned, transfigured. The gateway closed. So, they have to return the chalice to the museum. The stone is going to stay where it is. Aunt Annie tells Johnny to take Fraggle Rock and to hang it up in his castle, because here it's just going to be a weird thing for her to have. But there, it can just be part of the decor, and he can, it'd be very convincing there. And they're looking at some headlines from the newspapers talking about how the strange occurrences are beginning to wind down. They're not being seen anymore the way they were. And the spear is going to stay with Ronan, which it seems like everybody pretty much accepts that they are kind of a match set now. Kit says that he wouldn't try and take it because it would probably eat him alive. And Kit's going to be going home, and Nita got a message from her mom that they can change her flight home after all. So this weekend she's going to be heading back. And she's not really I expected her to be more regretful of that than she is. She seems pretty glad to head home. and not really like, I thought that she'd be sadder about leaving Ronan. You know, there was a lot of potential there. I felt like they had good chemistry. And I guess she has magic that she can come and visit him kind of whenever. So maybe that's part of why. But there's not really a vibe here of her acting like she's going to continue things. There's no like exchange between the two of them of her saying that she's coming back, is there? I don't think. So I don't know. I just feel a little bit bummed out by that because I kind of liked Ronan. I found him to be a compelling character and somebody who had a strong enough and defined enough character to stand up against somebody who is as strong and defined as Nita, which is not an easy thing to do. A lot of like writers, when they create romances, especially for YA stuff, they just make the love interest nice. And that's about all the personality that they have. Like, oh, they are friendly. They tend to do the right thing and are amusing. It's just a blandness that can be very puzzling to be like, why do I care why do I think she likes this guy? And I really understood why Nita was into Ronan. Like, I really got it, you know, and he seemed like the kind of kid that I probably would have been into at her age too. So I just like wondering about it, if he's going to be back. So then we get the last bit of this book, which I found so weird because it's basically like this last bit. I assume some of you also had to recognize it. This is an old folktale where a man, it's like the story starts with a man comes home after a long day at work and his wife asks him how his day was. And he sits in front of the fire to talk to her about this strange thing that he saw. And usually in the story, the guy is like a grave digger. And he was out at night in the graveyard and he saw these cats walking by carrying a coffin. And it goes exactly like the rest of this goes, where he then says like, McGrath dies and Tula pokes her head out and says, if McGrath is dead, then I'm queen of the cats. And then she goes up the chimney and disappears. And that's exactly how that story goes, is that the cat shrieks, except in that version, it's old Tom dead. That means I'm king of the cats. And then he goes up the chimney. It's like a very classic, like scary story, except it's not really scary at all. It's just strange. So this is a, you know, I guess meant to be a bit of like I think a little bit of an inside joke of her being like, this is a land in which all of the fables and old stories are actually true, even down to silly stories like this. But I was so distracted because I was like, is she doing that old story? It'd be like if a book ended with the who has my golden arm kind of thing. Like after everything is over and you're kind of wrapping things up, they just drop this really classic old story in, but it's being played like it's real. You know, it was just so I really loved everything up until this moment. And then there I was just kind of like, what is she doing? I don't get this. 'Cause like right after that, Nita just says, welcome to Ireland, which was pretty funny. And Johnny asks if Nita wants to stay. And it says that she goes to go pack. And that's it. That's the end. So it's just a weird way to end it. I just don't really think that works. At least not for me, because I know that story. You know, I just find it a weird choice to make. But to each his own. It's just like, I feel like if you haven't heard the story, you're going to be even more kind of like, what was that? You know, like I know putting myself in those shoes, if I hadn't read this, I would have just been like, okay, is that linked to Tula like stopping Balor? Is that like, I would be asking if this meant anything more, because it seems to come so out of nowhere. But because I do know, I feel like it's just kind of a bit of a joke for her, you know, a bit of a wink. So I don't know. Yeah, I just found that to be like a very strange way to end things, but there it is. Oh, sorry, coming back into the chat, Hugabug says she has a whole Feline Wizard side series. That's kind of fun. I haven't read them, though. I own Book of Night with Moon, but I never got to it. Oh, yeah, I've heard of... Yeah, that's from these books, right? Yama says, I don't know this tale. It was just confusing to me. Yeah, see, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like, I found it distracting because I knew the story. But if you don't know the story, I feel like that ending works even less well. And maybe this will come up in something else, or maybe it is just linked to the Feline Wizards series. But either way, it just seems like a real non sequitur at the end of everything. So, but overall, I really liked this book. I don't think it was my favorite, like, of the Young Wizards series so far. I have liked all of them a whole lot. So saying it's not my very favorite is by no means saying that it was not a good book. I think that the way it ended felt a little bit sudden, and that was really part of it, was that it was like, it wrapped up really quickly after sort of amping to this like huge. So I would have liked a little bit more about like restoring things to rights after they have the confrontation, because I guess my thing, like with not just like YA series, but fantasy in general, is when things are too tidy and you just get rid of like one baddie, and that means that everything else is sort of like taken care of. I don't like it when it's that simple. And that's not to say that it was really simple, because they had to get through a bunch of Fomor battles with like all these different creatures. But I mean, afterwards, like they take Balor down, they come back to their own world, and it's like, okay, all these weird events have stopped. I would have kind of liked it if there were still some like remnants of what was happening that they had to go and like sweep up and put, you know, take care of, just to indicate that, yeah, he's gone and they're like the last vestiges. So it is easy to manage them. But it's sort of like my problem that I always have with like sci-fi, where there's like a creature that's like the mother, and then there's all these like little creatures. And if you just kill the mother, then all the little creatures also die, which has long been one of my least favorite conceits in stories. It's just like, well, kill the one and they all die. Like, oh, and that's very convenient. So I kind of like, when they kill Balor, I wanted there to be more afterward when they come back to their own world, of them having to do things. And work together and getting to see other kinds of magic and stuff, because we're going back to the United States now. And I would kind of like to see these Irish wizards managing their shit in their world. You know, we got to see them band together and go into a different world. And we got to see Nita, an American in Ireland, managing some stuff. But I would have liked a bit more of getting to watch these other wizards doing their things. But also a problem with that is having this like mythology where the older a wizard gets, the less power he has. So I might be kind of too caught up in the way that like in Harry Potter, he gets to like see Voldemort and Dumbledore battle, and it's one of the most badass things you ever saw. But these people would not have as much to offer as Nita has, because she's younger. So I don't know, maybe that just wouldn't have worked. Let's see. Hugabug says, because I knew she had cat books, I always just assumed this was how she introed the spin-off series. Maybe. I wonder if the cat books are also based in folk stories. Seastar says, I didn't know the tale, so I considered this just more bit of the magnificent randomness filling the series. But I like this book much less than Deep Wizardry, because I think Deep Wizardry is absolute perfection. Hugabug says, High Wizardry was always my favorite of these four. Yeah, like I'm trying to think which one is my absolute favorite. I really love the first one with getting introduced to all of these like ideas of how wizards work here. And I really love the ending of the first one because it's like dealing with the lone one with such compassion, which was very unexpected. And that got me really emotional. But high wizardry is so imaginative in a way that the first one wasn't. But the first one was very imaginative. It's just, having it be like a computer thing is just such a different way to take it. I don't know. I don't know what my favorite is. But yeah, I do fucking wonder what Dareen is up to right now. So, all right, guys, I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you guys so much for coming and hanging out with me. After this, I have The Magician. So if any of you want to come to that, you are welcome. And this book was super fun. And thank you, Yama, again for commissioning this. And I don't know. Let me check real quick and see if it's like immediately evident when the next episode is, because I'll be starting the next book. So this is what the Young Wizard series. Today is the 28th. Okay, so the 5th of May, I start the next one. Also commissioned by Yama. Thanks, Yama. So yeah, that's what's going on. The 5th of May, and then the 26th, and then the 5th of June. So if you guys want more episodes after that, I'm going into July now in terms of my bookings. So you're going to want to get on that fairly quickly if you don't want there to be more than a month between episodes. All right, cool. Well, thank you guys again. And I will be seeing you in like a week and a half with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.